It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
So I wanted to set the table though. When you start trying to figure out what's a reasonable rate of return, I came out of college in the mid-90s. And I've told Bo many times that the period of time that you enter the workforce and start managing money greatly influences how you manage money.
Yeah.
And just so y'all know, Bo came out in the second half of the 2000s. Yep. So what do you think? He's greatly influenced by that period I just mentioned, 2008, where the market lost 37%. That's right. Guess who was managing money in the beginning of their career that time was Bo. So as you can imagine, Bo has some pessimism built into his outlook on things. Right. Me, who came out in the mid-90s, I'm rock and roll thinking things are always going to be great. And let me show you why. I have something I want to put up on the screen. Do y'all see these rates of returns back from back in 1999?
Does that say 134%?
Yeah, those are the top performers in categories from 1999. But then look down at the bottom. Here's the one that will blow your mind, is the categories by age, by decade.
Holy cow. So like specialty technology for that decade, so from 1990 to 1999, annualized 28.7%.
But by the way, you can find large cap on there. It doesn't have to be some crazy specialty category. There's broad categories.
Large blend, that's just S&P 500. That's at a 15.65%. Do you realize what happens if you can make 15.5% for 10 years running?
So is that a reasonable expectation? This is why I'm asking you, is because you have to, what is a reasonable expectation of a rate of return for your portfolio? So I'm going to put this to bed now for a little bit. We'll come back to this, don't worry. But here's the thing that I think is interesting, because I just showed you 1999. That could cloud your judgment into thinking, and this is why we ask this. We'll go ahead and let you see behind the curtain of what it's like to work at Abound Wealth or become a client of Abound Wealth. We ask a question of, what do you think a reasonable rate of return is? We want to know this. When you're a prospect, we want to know what's going to make you happy. If somebody comes in and they tell me, I expect to make 12% a year, we know we need to have some conversations, because they're still back in that time machine of 1999, where that's where rate of return. So that's having an overly optimistic outlook. Let's now look at the other side of it.
Well, I was going to say, a lot of times, Brian, when I'm talking to potential prospects who are thinking about retirement, or folks who've maybe been on the sidelines for a while, and we ask that question, they may say something like 3%, 4%, 5%.
Yep.
They think that's a reasonable rate of return. That tells us less about their tolerance for risk and a lot more about their prior investment experience.
Yep.
They remember the dot-com busting. They remember the Great Recession. It's really interesting. The reason we ask that question is so we can get that insight into what they think.
And I think that adds a lot of value. I mean, whether a person is too aggressive or too conservative, let's just have a good conversation with them. I want to, because here's something that's been in the news recently. Now, I don't have a screenshot for this one. But Vanguard's Greg Davis, just, he's the head of their investments. Now, I want to tell you, if you didn't know, Greg said this. It got a lot of press in February, but Greg actually said this back in 2018 too.
Okay.
I don't know why it all of a sudden got amplified when it came back out in February, and he said it in an interview.
Right.
But he said he expects at Vanguard, they expect the annualized performance for the financial markets is going to be around 5% a year.
For the U.S. equity markets,
the U.S. equity markets could be 5% a year for the next decade. And that's down from what they had previously projected at about 8%. So you hear that and you're like, oh man, this party.
They're not looking.
Now, I want to tell you, just to give you some background on Greg. Greg's a bond guy.
Okay.
He comes from a bond background. Bond guys, they can be a little down on equities. They don't exactly love, it's just like I pick on you for coming out in 2008. You have a pessimism. When somebody comes to me from a bond background, I'm like, oh, okay.
It's a little bit different.
You're probably not loving the S&P 500 and things like that. So I'm going to use that to talk about expectations. But then here's another thing when people ask me about Greg's prediction, because predictions, I will tell you, be very careful. Yep. I think you can get in a lot of trouble, but I do want to talk about some analytics. If we're only going to make 5% a year for the next decade, I want you to think about the fact that your cash now makes 2%, easily 2%. I mean, a lot of our money market funds at, Fidelity and so forth, 2.4, aren't they getting close to 2.5?
2.5% almost.
So we're supposed to believe the difference between risk assets and risk-free assets is only 2%?
For you financial nerds out there, that's called the equity risk premium. And historically, 2 to 3% is pretty low for an equity risk premium.
The other counterpoint I would make for Greg is that wage inflation, you're starting to see it tick above 3%. Right. That is a huge indicator on long-term inflation because wages do impact how people spend and so forth. I don't know that I buy into the 5%. If I had to give you another play besides Greg being historically a fixed income guy, I think he's also doing the tried and true practice of downplaying expectations because nobody gets mad or fires you for telling that you're going to make 5%, and then when you make 8%,
everybody's happy.
Nobody fires you for that. Now, if you tell everybody you're going to make them 12% and you come in at 9%, they cuss you.
That's right.
But if you tell them 5% and then you make 8 or 9%, and then they're going to be like, oh, he's a hero. They put you up and they dump Gatorade on you.
A little bit of setting expectations.
I think it's controlling expectations.
I don't disagree with that.
So I think he's out there in left field with a limp, and then when the ball's hit to him, he's going to run and catch it.